Hey guys, my name is Brad. I am one of 3 indie devs who is currently working on a project called Skycurser. And Skycurser is basically a 2D shmup, and our goal for Skycurser is for it to be available in the arcade first. So we're actually building this game for an arcade cabinet. Specifically, we are using Game Maker basically as the middleware to program out this game. And then my name in particular is Brad. I'm working with 2 other guys. One of the other guys' names is Chris, and the other guy's name is Phil. And Chris in particular is the art director, and he basically does all the sprites that you see on screen in this game, at least for now. We have completed the first level up to this point, but he does all of the images that you see interacting in this game, pixel for pixel. Our goal with this is to build a game that's largely reminiscent of the late 80s and 90s when arcades were all the rage, and just kind of take the player and put them back in the arcade, at least the feel of the arcade back then. So our shmup is, I already mentioned, it's 2D. It's horizontal scrolling. We call it a metal on meat arcade game, and specifically, you, the hero, are Guy. Your name is Guy Griffin. The jet he fights in is called Skycurser, and you are essentially alone against the world. And your goal is to basically take on the mutant hordes that are coming at you from outer space and attacking Earth. And so our goals for this initially, at least, are to make this a one-player arcade game. It will have a couple of other modes associated with it, specifically one mode that we've already toyed around with and we basically already have a working copy of, is a mode called Meat Mode, where basically it's a high score contest. It's not story mode. It's just the goal is to get as many meat kills as possible in the middle of this. So the goal for us is to stream daily. The production of the game, we've already been in production with the game for about a year now. We are indie devs, as I mentioned, and so that means that the 3 of us have other jobs that we work during the day professionally, and some of them are somewhat related and some are not. All of us have a little bit of experience collectively in marketing. Personally, I am a software engineer during the day, not a gaming software engineer, but I've had a lot of time to sit down, specifically with Game Maker, and Chris and Phil, and figure out how a lot of the software engineering really just kind of applies to Game Maker. Game Maker, I found, is a lot like JavaScript in general, and a lot of the same programming constructs that are available in JavaScript are also available in Game Maker language. So specifically, we are using Game Maker Studio Professional Edition. We started with just Game Maker Studio, and then eventually purchased the Professional Edition. The Professional Edition was like $49. We're trying to do this, with not huge budgets, and just trying to make sure that whatever we put into this, we can also give back to any other indie devs who are out there trying to either start a game for the very first time, or who have already built some games, but hopefully to get some ideas not only from the programming that you're going to see on stream, maybe some artwork inspires you, gives you some ideas, maybe some sound effects inspire you, but also maybe some of the ways that we market our game also hopefully will inspire you. As I stream, my goal is going to be to dedicate as much time as I can to explaining what I'm working through, and also just talking through each of the items that I'm working through, specifically the objects and the scripts that I have in the room. Since I've been working on this for about a year, I have a ton of sprites, a ton of objects, a ton of scripts that all work together nicely and kind of give us a good feeling Skycurser game. So I mentioned that I'm realizing that I mentioned earlier a little bit about Chris. A little bit more about Chris. He's our sound engineer, so he's literally created all of the sounds that we hear, or specifically for the music. He has literally created from scratch all the music that is associated with this game, and many of the sound effects he has also created. Some of the sound effects, very few of them, as I understand, have we paid for. And have a license for those. So those are all you can. There are several websites that you can get those sound effects off of if you need to. But I'll get into that as I'm covering everything. Let me switch over to Phil real quick and talk to you a little bit about Phil. Phil has been, and you're going to see a lot of this information on our channel as well. You'll see basically that we have. Everything that we can think of to put on the channel, you'll see it down below if you read. But specifically, let me talk about Phil. Phil has been really kind of key to getting this whole thing, this whole ball kicked off and rolling. He started with GameMaker initially, and just kind of an idea for a game, 2D shmup. And just started programming it, and then kind of showed it off to Chris, and then Chris and Phil both got a chance to show it off to me, and I got really excited about it. And since I am just a software engineer anyways, I of course jumped all over this and told them I wanted to be involved, and just got really excited about it. And so Phil kind of got the ball rolling, like I said, and then since then he's done a little bit of programming. He's also literally our press correspondent. We've had a lot of people reach out to us. Just they're excited about the game. They think kind of what we're doing is a little bit unique. We're building a game in the 2000 teens for what feels like it would have been the late 80s or 90s. So our goal initially, like I said, is to get this off into get this game off into the arcade first, and then we of course have had multiple requests to get it ported over to other platforms, so we'll probably utilize GameMaker to do that. But beyond Phil just being the press guy, he answers a lot of interview questions. He also stirs up hype a little bit on social media, and most importantly, one of Phil's big contributions is he's a fanatic about old arcade games and cabinets and hardware that goes with that. So up to this point, he's been fundamental for us in terms of allowing us to get the hardware that we need to build this arcade cabinet and keep the authentic feel of the arcade as you're playing the arcade cabinet. So the details that I have available to me right now with the hardware that we have are for the arcade cabinet are in the channel here. You can scroll down and look at the hardware information, but right now we basically have a JAMA compatible PCB that also plays nicely with basically a Raspberry Pi right now. Not exactly a Raspberry Pi, but pretty close. It's also got it's also of course able to connect to the old CRT tubes, so we have basically an actual cabinet set up for it right now, with a couple of cabinets on standby that we're going to build out as well and send off to a couple of places. But you'll find us at the next big arcade convention that we're aware of, the Midwest Gaming Classic. That one is in April 11th and 12th. It's coming right up, and we'll have our cabinet there so some people can check it out. But our scheduled deadline or just kind of our goal to get this completed by is going to be early 2016. We're thinking about February 2016 that we should have the entire game completed, and from there will be probably, when we're ready to roll this out to other platforms, there will probably be some other slight modifications that we can make to roll it out to other platforms. Of course, GameMaker makes that a little bit easier, and so that's one of the other reasons why we chose GameMaker to develop this in. There were some other ways that we could have developed this, especially for the old arcade games. There are some specific languages that we could use and program it right to the board. We opted not to do that. There was also Unity that we could have used. We saw that Unity is obviously a really professional piece of software, but we ended up with GameMaker because it was easily within reach, and as we're trying to think of any other indie devs that are in a similar position, we're also trying to just think of where we can save costs where possible while also producing a really good game that has a really good look and feel to it. This technically is we're looking at this stream today as the first stream. I do have a task at hand right now. The current task is to continue working on the shrapnel. I worked on a little bit of shrapnel yesterday. The shrapnel that I worked on is related directly to two objects in the game that specifically blow up after they've taken enough damage, basically after their hit points drop below 0. So I've been, of course, given the sprites by Chris, and now I'm ready to go ahead and complete working on the shrapnel. I think what I'll do, my goal as I stream, my goal is to stream daily, but if I can't stream for some reason, I will probably put a note on the chat, basically on the stream, and let people see that I'm not going to be able to stream that day. But what I'll probably still do is play back during the regular stream time. I'll probably play back one of the previous streams that has previously been recorded and saved. So you should be able to tune in at any time, and if you missed one or two sessions on a specific day that I'm gone, you may be able to catch that session if you tune in at that time, so I can talk through everything there. So back to the task at hand, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, feel free to ask questions, and I'll try to engage with the chat as much as possible. Let me just make sure we're still good at the moment. Okay. So right now I'm currently working on the shrapnel, and I have recently been given a couple of sprites, and if you're familiar with GameMaker, you can create sprites and control a little bit of the sprite when you've created it. So the image sprite is basically right here on screen. As I scroll through the sprite, I can see this specific piece of shrapnel rotate as it would in the air, and then basically with some programming I can force the shrapnel to go into random directions or specific directions that I would like it to go in. Chris, our art director, basically gave me 6 different pieces of shrapnel here. I've added all of them, and I've given them points of origin, and I do this normally when I'm given a sprite in particular. I've given them points of origin that are basically right in the middle of their sprite. So that allows me to get an idea that about the center of the mass of whatever it is that I'm putting on screen is there's going to be a little bit to the left of the x-coordinate and a little bit to the right of the x-coordinate that I will have to control and make sure that depending on what I'm trying to do, that it's either all the way on screen or part way on screen, or you know, anything related to that. So additionally, if you're familiar with GameMaker, you know that once you've created a sprite, you can create an associated object with that sprite, and I've done exactly that. So I've associated all the sprites that I created up at the top with objects that I have put into a folder that I've titled Impacts under Objects. And once I've created an object, I can then associate it with a particular sprite that has already been created up there at the top. And if I want to, from here, I can add events to the specific sprite, and then I can add actions. Usually with the actions, I like to go in and program the actions specifically with the code. But I do like to use some of these, specifically these events that occur, so that I can trigger different things to happen at different times. One thing I did, so I created objects for all 6 of those pieces of shrapnel that I was handed, and then one additional thing that I did was give each of these shrapnel objects a parent. So if you see here, when I click on the object itself, I have specified a parent, and that parent is named object-based shrapnel. So generally, what I'll be doing is I will be inheriting as much as possible when it comes to objects. So I will create an object, and then I will create like objects and give them the parent of a base object, so that they can have as many events as possible and as much of the same code as possible that has already been written, so that I don't have to custom write code that is doing the same thing over and over. So one of the things, hey NeoZoom, how's it going, man? One of the things that I mentioned was that I'd like to mention is that you'll be seeing me as I'm working through GameMaker, and because I'm an indie dev, I think it's important to have a good amount specific tools on hand that are low cost and that are easy to get access to. So I'm going to talk through some of the tools that I'm using in addition to GameMaker that might also help you in whatever project that you're working on. So one particular tool that we use, and those tools are, of course, are listed down here in our development section on the channel, but one of the tools that we use is Skycurser. I'm sorry, is Trello, and we have a Skycurser development board. It's a private board. But I basically can put a backlog of tickets on here, things that I know that need to be done, and then once I'm ready, I can assign them to myself or any other developers that could be on the project in the near future. And then I can focus on that particular thing that I'm working on, and generally when I'm streaming, you'll see that my current task is probably whatever is currently assigned to me. Or is in progress. So I know for sure right now this particular piece of shrapnel is in progress. I'm going to go ahead and assign these other items to myself because they definitely, I'll definitely be the one working on them. Some of the things that I'm going to cover as I do future streams and updates, I will be doing. I will be specifically removing duplicate code and making sure objects are inheriting each other correctly. So I mentioned that we basically have a lot of objects that have been created over this last year. We've been working on the project for, like I mentioned, for about a year already, and so we've created a lot of things and have a really good functioning first level, and have done even a couple of live location tests with the arcade cabinet. And but while we were creating this and learning GameMaker and trying to make sure we understood it, we of course incurred what we call in the software engineering space, we incurred a lot of tech debt. So a lot of that tech debt has to do with correctly inheriting objects from a parent object, and also correctly making sure that you're reducing and removing as much duplicate code as possible, so that when you make a change in one place, you don't have to go change it in 6 or 7 other places, or even another place. So reducing as much code where possible. is most ideal and will keep a lot of bugs from being introduced as you're creating new code. Let me think. Additionally, I think there's one more item on the Trello board that I wanted to mention. Yeah, I think I've pretty much covered everything. We've just got to pay down that tech debt. So what you're going to see, at least for probably these first few, thanks for the follow, NeoZoom. I really appreciate it. What you're going to see, at least for these first few streams, is that I'm going to be working on some smaller tasks, especially since MGC is coming up. And there's going to be a lot of duplicate code. I may have to change something in one place and then go change it in another place. But additionally, in the very near future, I'm going to go through and I'm going to make sure that all that code is cleaned up, again, so that I can reduce and reuse code where possible. So I streamed last night. I didn't record, so I'm counting this as our first daily stream. But what I did last night on stream, I talked a little bit through the sprites and the objects that I had created related to the shrapnel, and I specifically located the two places that I needed to make sure that the shrapnel effects were added. And so I found script enemy 1 die is one location, and then also script tank 1 die is another location that I have to affect the shrapnel explosion. So I'll just play through this through the game really quick so that you can get a feel for what the game is actually like, and you can see the exact piece that I'm working on. Specifically, it's the shrapnel. So let me just go ahead and do that. While that's loading, of course, if you're familiar with GameMaker, you have to it has to compile. So the second you're ready to play, it will take, I don't know, sometimes depending on how big your game is, it can take half a minute or a minute to compile everything, and then it's ready to play. So as soon as this is ready to play, I will make it full screen, and then we'll see the exact piece that I'm going to work on. Because we're building this for an arcade cabinet, and this is built for the resolution of 320 by 240, because that's what those old CRT tubes in the arcade cabinets play best at. Then when this loads, my screen being over 1200 pixels resolution right now, it loads up really small, and then I have to make it larger. I've found that when I've tried to just start it in full screen mode, which I can do, that specifically it will not stream correctly. So I've just taken it out of full screen mode. I've put it in windowed mode, and I know for sure that this streams correctly in windowed mode. So I will figure out the full screen mode thing with OBS. I'm using OBS in particular. I'll figure that out here in the near future, so I can just load it up in full screen mode. But for now, I have it in windowed mode. So I'm going to go in real quick. And the way I have this set up, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward real quick to the specific unit I'm trying to take a look at. Here they are. That was one of them. And I'm sure there's another one coming up right here. Let me just get to it. Here's one of the other ones. And so what I'm looking for is what happens when this thing actually blows up. What happens to the shrapnel? So that's the shrapnel that just occurred, and then there's two more that are here. Just want to see the look and the feel of the shrapnel one more time. So there are a couple of things that I want to fix as I'm looking at it that are related to the shrapnel. The shrapnel, kind of the paths of the shrapnel right now, specifically the paths of the shrapnel that go up and then go down, that are really tight to the explosions. I want to make sure that that shrapnel kind of has a more authentic feel to it when something explodes. I kind of want it to be coming out of the explosion fairly quickly, and then when it reaches its peak of flight, I want it to slow down rapidly, almost to zero, and then begin to accelerate as it's coming out of the curve. So what that's going to take me a little bit of is I'm going to have to do a little bit of reading. Again, I've only been working with GameMaker for about a year, and there's a lot of documentation to GameMaker, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of reading, of course, here on stream. But I've got to figure out specifically how I can control a path and the speed of the path depending on where it's at currently. Let me just make sure I'm staying up with what's happening in stream. Screenshot, open link. Yep. This is Skycurser. Yep. This one, yep, you need to add a source game source in OBS. Got it. Game source. Somebody mentioned that to me yesterday when I was streaming, and I'll make sure that I do that. So as soon as I get off stream today, I will definitely do that. But yeah, this is the Skycurser NeoZoom. I'm glad that you found it and that you're excited about it. I think, based on what I read here, it looks like you're really excited about it. So, yeah, I guess I should also mention, since I don't think I've mentioned it yet, and technically this is the first stream that we're actually recording, I do have a green screen behind me. I'm in my 30s. I'm married with a wife and kid, and the screen, the room can get a little messy, but more importantly, it gives us a little bit of privacy. What you see behind me is a green screen and a picture of our living room when it was clean. But if you see a little bit of fuzziness or weirdness on the screen, that's just the green screen. But yeah, this is basically exactly what our house looks like when it's clean and nobody's here. So. Additionally, let's go back and look at paths. I'm trying to look at path points, defining paths. I've already defined some paths. I guess I haven't shown it on stream today. I did show, let me talk through a couple of things that I talked through yesterday that I definitely want to be on the stream and recorded, just so that if you're watching you can get caught up. And then I'll get into reading the documentation here in a second. So I did mention yesterday that I have some paths that I've created for this shrapnel. So what you're seeing happen or occur on screen right now are paths, and the shrapnel is randomly taking a specific path, any one of these paths. And when I say randomly taking a path, that's because of the base object that I've set up. There's a create event that occurs on the base object, which all of these other 6 pieces of shrapnel inherit from. And as I understand in GameMaker, a child object will inherit its parents' events, but as soon as you create an event on the child object that is the same as an event on the parent object, the child object no longer inherits that same parent event from the parent object. It will inherit all of the other parent events on the parent object, but it will not inherit the new event that you've added on the child object. So right now, you'll notice that the only thing that the objects have in the shrapnel objects have is an associated sprite and associated parent object. Right now they don't have any events because I don't need anything particular to each one of these pieces of shrapnel to occur. The big question that I had when I was looking at a child inheriting from a parent was, does the child inherit the parent's event? Let's say I have a step event in the parent and a step event in the child. Does it go ahead and run the step event of the parent and also run the step event of the child? And the answer, as I understand it, is no. The second that you write a child event that is the same as one of the parent events, the child no longer inherits that event from the parent. So I'm trying to be clear with that and just make sure we're on the same page for that. But back to this create event that I have. Let me see what I'm doing in the step event real quick. Yeah, so the step event is just making sure that if the shrapnel goes off screen, that the instance of the shrapnel gets destroyed. And I'm specifically focusing on the instance of the shrapnel because I want to make sure that I don't destroy the object of the shrapnel. If I destroy the object-based shrapnel, then everything on screen, all that shrapnel, would disappear at the same time the second that something went off screen. Instead, I only want to destroy that particular instance that I have created. So back to the step code, I've got an X position, I've got an X position here, I've got a Y position. So I want to make sure the shrapnel gets destroyed the second that it goes off screen in the direction that I want to control. I feel like I see a little bit of an issue with the way I have it currently, and so I'm going to fix that here in a second. But basically my screen is set up so that the X coordinate of the screen is up in the X and Y coordinates are up in the 0, 0 is up in the top left of the screen, so that I have access. If I know that something is at the 0 X coordinate, it's all the way to the left of the screen. If something's at the what I have termed room width, and this is a game maker variable that your room has access to by default. If it's at the room width, I know based on the fact that my room is set up at 320 by 240. Let me go look at the room so you can see what's in the room. Level 1 room. So this is my room. By default, let me get that guy out of here. Delete that one. By default, I have the room set up at 320 by 240. The room speed is 60 frames per second. So I think by default, any room that you create is set at 30 frames per second. We wanted a little bit of a smoother feel, so we set ours at 60 frames per second. So what that means is any step event that gets created in any object is going to occur 60 times, based on this number that I've set here, that step event is going to occur 60 times per second. So so that's kind of how the step event works, and then you'll see some of that. I'll explain some more related to that when I get into the step events and some other objects. But the objects that I have initially in the room right now are, let me just make sure I can see them here. I'm not seeing them where I think I should be seeing them. There it is. Okay. So this initial one is the object controller for room level 1. As I scroll over it, it shows up at the bottom down here of the room stage, basically. And then I have object controller background level 1. I have object controller clouds, and then object enemy generator. So I have opted out of timelines, using timelines with GameMaker for now, because as I understood, when you work off of a timeline initially, and there may just be some more documentation reading that I need to do on timelines in particular, is that the thing that timelines do that I didn't like, that I wanted to leave out, was that timelines just basically they are a timeline. They run from start to finish, and you can drop an object in at a particular place in a timeline, and it will appear on screen at a particular point in time. And the issue that I had with that was that there were a couple of key custom places that specific events needed to occur before I let the next thing happen in the room. So I didn't want, let's say, if the whole room is 120 seconds, which it's not, it's a little bit longer than that. If the whole room, or all of level 1, was 120 seconds total, and I wanted the screen to transition to a completely different background at 20 seconds, then but I didn't want the screen to transition unless all the objects or all the enemies that were on screen had either flown off screen or been killed. Then I needed to make sure that condition was met. And I'm pretty sure, as I'm thinking through this, and as I've become a little bit more familiar with GameMaker since I created it, or since we started working on this project, that you can add conditions with points in time on the timeline. But again, as our goal was to get started, get moving, and get something out there, I opted out of timelines, and I've basically created my own timeline. What I would like to do is modify that timeline, and that's one thing that I need to add to Trello as I'm talking through it. What I would like to do is add story points so that I can quickly jump to a story point and do some testing immediately as soon as I complete something, instead of doing kind of probably what you saw me do initially, which was I've kind of worked around that a little bit for now, and I've created what I call a speed engine. And the second that I turn the speed engine on, it basically just performs a fast forward in the room, and it everything speeds up to a specific speed that I have specified, and just flies by you on the screen, and then you can start and stop that fast forward as much as you need to until you get to that particular unit you're looking for, and then you can watch how that unit plays. Well, that still is a little bit time consuming, and adding story points would be a good fix to this, and maybe even working on the timeline the way that GameMaker has it set up would be, I'd be able to work within those constraints now that I understand GameMaker a little bit easier. But again, I just wanted to show you our actual room size is 320 by 240, and I've got just a couple of objects in here. I do the backgrounds with the objects that are in here at this object controller background level 1. That's what makes everything fly by. I'll get into that in a later session. But for now, back to kind of what happens here. I'm basically saying if a piece of shrapnel goes all the way past the left of the screen, so it goes off screen to the left, or it goes off screen to the right, or it goes off screen to the top. And I think this is a problem right here. I don't want to destroy, I'm saying don't destroy if the shrapnel goes above the top of the room, but I think this is incorrect because I want to make sure that it only gets destroyed if it goes past the room height of the room. Again, another variable that we have access to, similar to room height, that your room automatically has access to while your game is running. So then I say with self being this particular instance of the shrapnel that I have, go ahead and destroy it. The reason why you want to destroy an object when it goes off screen is so that your game doesn't slow down to a screeching halt whenever it just has so many objects in the room. Even if they're off screen, just because they're off screen doesn't mean that they have been garbage collected and destroyed and cleaned up so that they're not slowing down your gameplay. So the reason why I don't want to destroy the shrapnel if it goes above the top of the room is because I want the shrapnel to be able to fly up above the top of the screen and then fly back down, if that makes sense in terms of general physics and just kind of how that would work, right? Gravity would pull that back down. So that's the step event for this, and then I've got a create event. The create event of the parent object, which is what this is, chooses a random shrapnel path that I have created, and I already mentioned that I have these 9 shrapnel paths that I've created. I'll click on a couple of them so that you can see them. This is the basic way that these work, and so the shrapnel will follow based on the code that I have shown you in the parent object. The shrapnel will follow, it will choose basically selects a random any one of the list that you put inside of the method. Any one of these items that you pass as a parameter to this method is basically a random choosing of whatever you're passing in. So in this case, I want it to randomly select one of these 9 paths that have been created, and then with path speed, I want to randomly give the path of these objects a speed of 3, 4, or 5, so that will be fairly quick, so it flies off screen fairly quick. Additionally, I wanted to make sure that the shrapnel, this particular piece of shrapnel, starts along a path, and in path start, let's go look at that documentation real quick so that if you're not already familiar with it, we can be a little bit more familiar with it. But basically, path start allows you to specify a path, and in this case, the path is going to be followed by the current object that I'm working with. If I wanted to work with a different object and send a different object along the path, I could go back to the step event to show you. I could use this syntax right here, this statement, and say with, and then say, if I wanted to send something else on screen along a specific path, I could say with whatever that instance is of a particular object, and then I could send it along a specific path. So, but I don't want to do that with a different object right now. I want to do that with whatever object gets created right here, and I want to send it along the randomly selected shrapnel path, and I want to also give it a randomly selected path speed. And to keep these consistent, I think I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, that's why I did that, because that's a predefined variable in Game Maker that you can control. I think to keep it consistent, though, I will go ahead and say path shrapnel here, just to keep my variable naming consistent and not confuse somebody why I named one variable with PATH and one variable with PTH. So I've got I'm passing in the path just like it says to do in the documentation. I'm also passing in the randomly selected speed, which is 3, 4, or 5. And then I'm also passing in what I want it to do when it reaches the end of the path. Game Maker gives you 4 different options that you can utilize with a path in an object when the object is finished completing the path. The one that I currently have selected is continue from the current position. So I think basically what that does is once it reaches the end of any one of those paths, it will just continue in the direction it's already going at the same speed that it's already going. So that's how I have it set up currently. And then the last piece here is, do I want the shrapnel to generate, start on the path from where it is generated or from the absolute position of the path? And the absolute position of the path would be wherever it is in this entire schema of what this room basically of the path is. So right now the path is 640 high by 848 wide. I don't care about that. I don't want it to start from position 288 and X and 160 Y. I want it to start from wherever I create the instance of the shrapnel at. So the reason why that's important is because the last parameter that I can pass into this method right here, is that of, do I want to start it at the absolute position or the current position? And if I pass in false, I want to start it at the relative position or the current position where the instance is created. And I'll get out of here, back to here. And so that's kind of how that's set up. I also noticed yesterday that the image speed of these was going a little bit too fast. And image speed is just how quickly, again, you're probably already familiar with this if you've worked with Game Maker at all, but image speed is very simply how quickly the image is going based on its settings when it got imported into Game Maker. So so my buddy basically, my buddy Chris, who is also one of the indie devs on this project, our graphic artist or our art director, he's basically doing a lot of this, a lot of the pixel art at 30 frames per second, and that's how he's exporting it. So what ends up happening when you're playing something at 30 frames per second, when it gets imported into a game at 60 frames per second, it just looks a little bit faster than it should. So I slowed it down right now to about half, and I feel like the half speed on how quickly these pieces of shrapnel rotate looks just about right. So where do these pieces of shrapnel get created? And we've already covered that once they get created, they will follow this particular path. So these pieces of shrapnel get created and are associated with 2 objects. I already mentioned one object, and that initial object is object enemy 1. Here's what the sprite looks like. It's this little guy right here. He's an eyeball sitting on top of a plane. Our shorthand definition for him is EBP, eyeball plane. And he is when he dies, he explodes, and he's already got a little bit of blood effects explosion to him, and he's also got a little bit of metal explosion to him. What we wanted to do, I guess I should say fire explosion, what we wanted to do was add a little bit of metal shrapnel that comes out of those explosions when he blows up, and we wanted to do the same thing for the tank, which you saw as well. This is the tank. The tank, when it gets generated on screen, has 3 different eyeballs sitting on top of it, and it's got a couple of propellers attached to it, similar to the Object Enemy 1. It kind of looks like there's no propeller on the front, but we attach a propeller on the front when that particular object gets generated. So specifically with this object and with all the other objects, this is one of the pieces I was talking about. Let me make sure I'm staying up with chat. Everything looks good at the moment. One of these pieces that I was talking about was I'm going to need to do some deduplication of duplicate code, and where possible create some more inheritances, but also just reduce duplicate lines of code. So as we were trying to get this out the door and get a working first stage up over the last year, we created objects. We created a couple of multiple different events where what was running inside of the events, and in most of these cases, in particular, the step event and the create event generally have similar things that have been created, and the code between them is very similar. So in the very near future, one of my tasks will be to deduplicate that code. But for now, you're going to see a couple of pieces here. You're going to see the script enemy 1 animation, or I should say the animation script for each object, the movement script for each object, the collide script, the speed engine. This is the thing I was talking about earlier, where when I need to fast forward and jump to a specific point in time in level 1, I just hit the fast forward button, and it turns on the speed engine, and everything goes about X times faster than what it previously was. So that's the thing that's helpful there. Additionally, I also have this item right here called outside room. This helps do that garbage collection that I was talking about. Once an object goes outside of the room, specifically in a location that I want it to go outside of, then we destroy the object. And the key thing about destroying an object, if you're doing it correctly, and because as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when we create most of our sprites, for instance, let's go look at the sprite for this object. When we create most of our sprites, we set a point of origin, and the point of origin is, generally speaking, in the center of the width and the height of this particular sprite. So that's mostly the case, not always the case, but most of the time it's the case with specifically enemies that have been created. And so when the enemy or the object goes off screen, you can't destroy the object as soon as the point of origin is less than 0. So if the enemy is coming on from the right at 320 pixels, it travels all the way across the screen to the left, its point of origin will be at 0, but this much of the, let me see, can I zoom in here? I don't think I can zoom in on this guy. This much of this particular sprite will still be left on screen, whatever's past the point of origin. So you have to make sure whenever you're destroying an object that you know what the width of the sprite is, so that you can delete the sprite appropriately once not only the point of origin gets past 0 on screen, but also the remaining width of the sprite, so that once it gets past screen, then you can destroy the object. So just wanted to explain that real quick, how that works, and then script enemy 1 dies. So all of these scripts are executed in this step event, which means, because back to our room speed being at 60 frames per second, every single one of these scripts gets executed 60 times per second. So this is basically checking similar to this script right here, the die script and the collide script. The collide script is checking 60 times per second to see if it has run into Skycurser or Guy. If it runs into Guy, then it does something in particular when those two points collide. And then with script enemy 1 die, whenever it's also this particular script is checking to see if this particular instance of this object has less than 0 hit points. So when I create this object, I give it a specific number of hit points, and I do that right here. And depending on which mode you're playing, I mentioned earlier that we do story mode and meat mode. We may do some additional modes later, but for right now there's story mode and meat mode. The guy is a little bit stronger in story mode, and I set that to his hit points. So he has 100 hit points whenever this starts, and then I, with the 3 different weapons that we have, whenever they connect with this particular enemy, they draw different amounts of health out of the enemy. So they, let's say the minigun, or the Vulcan cannon, we also call it, hits this particular enemy. I think the minigun is by default takes it down 10 hit points per hit. So in this case, you'll have to hit this enemy. You'll have to hit this enemy 10 times before it actually gets destroyed. And when it goes down, or I should say before its health drops below 0, and when its health actually drops below 0, then back to the step event, this particular piece is triggered right here. Well, I should say this is triggered every single time through this step event, but also when it gets to that script, let's go look at that script right now. When we get to that script, the script itself checks to see if that particular instance of that object has dropped below 0 hit points. So let me talk about argument 0 real quick as it relates to GameMaker. So GameMaker, I think the number is that it lets you pass up to 15 arguments into any script. So you can either grab the argument with argument 0 if you're trying to grab the very first argument, or argument 0, kind of like you're doing it if it's an array and you're trying to grab a particular index of the array. I've chosen to do it this way because I've seen a lot of examples this way. I think it's just barely a little bit cleaner, allows you to write less brackets more often. So I don't think there's any particular way that's right or wrong. I've just chosen to do it this way. Additionally, once the hit points are below 0, actually let me talk about argument 0 one more time, which is with the object itself. So I'm passing into this script argument 0, which is this first argument that is here. Here's another example of a different script that I'm calling with multiple parameters, and I'm passing in multiple arguments to that script basically. But in this particular case, I'm only passing one argument, and I'm passing in self.id. So with each object and with an instance that is created, you have this item called self. Self refers to only the instance that you're currently working with. So the reason why that's important is because if you have multiple instances of object enemy 1 on screen, and if you saw kind of the gameplay a little bit earlier, I had 2 object enemy 1s come out at the same time, and in different parts of that level I have like 4 come out at the same time. So you want to only control the specific instance and see if that specific instance has dropped below 0. You can do that by passing in the ID of the instance. Once you pass in the ID of the instance, you have access to all of the variables that you created for this instance in the create event or in the step event or any other event that has created a variable for this particular instance of this object. So once I pass in self.id to the script, I can say argument 0 dot explosions, or argument 0 dot image bool, or argument 0 dot base image speed, or argument 0 dot hover bounce, and I can control the particular items of this instance of this object in that way in that script. So let me get over to the script itself, script enemy 1, and I wrote the code for this yesterday, so let me just talk about this script real quick. I'm seeing if the hit points drop below 0. If they drop below 0 based on Skycurser dealing damage with any one of the 3 weapons to this enemy, then I execute what is inside of this block of code here. So once I get inside of this block of code, I see if the collision is turned on for this particular object. Initially, what I noticed when I was creating these objects, and the object would die and the explosions would occur on the object, I think I'm doing up to 5 explosions. While the explosions are still occurring, steps are still going by, which means time is still going by on screen, which allows the object to then collide with Skycurser. Well, if the object's hit points are below 0, it's no longer fair to the player to let that object collide with Skycurser. So once its hit points drop below 0, it should no longer collide, but it should continue getting destroyed. And the destroy piece of it is just whatever we want to occur to it while it's dying, right? In this particular case, so when this hits right here, and I set collision on in the create event, I set collision on equal to true. If it's a true when it hits here, it will turn it off, and it will run this code. Initially, it will say, it will look to see if I'm doing a check here to see if global lives left is greater than 0. That's Skycurser's lives left greater than 0, and I'm only playing this sound if Skycurser has more than 0 lives. This particular sound is the explosion of this object. Additionally, I'm playing some sounds to explosion of metal, and we call these a couple of different things. We've added some sounds into here. But once it gets past this collision, once it turns on collision, it will never hit this block of code again. So doing something like this allows me to keep from running it over and over as the enemy has been destroyed. It allows me to keep on running the block of code without. It allows me to get a little bit of efficiency out of the code, so it doesn't slow down each time it hits this block of code. It'll just pass over this once it realizes that, oh, collision on is not equal to true anymore. Additionally, I have decided here that I want to make the mutant itself, the eyeball on top of the plane, explode, and I'm doing that. I'm deciding, do I want to make it explode 3 or 4 times? I let that occur. I let that occur here multiple times. What I should probably do with this, because this is executing every single time it gets into this block, what I should probably do with this is take it outside and put it in the create event and do something a little bit more sensical here. And I think I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to just say argument 0, argument 0 dot explosion count choice, and I'm going to take that out and put it in the create event. So cut, and then put it in the create event, and let's see here. So okay, so now it will only occur once. The explosion count will only occur once, and the time that it decides how many explosions will occur for specifically the blood. And I'm thinking I'm just going to go ahead and say blood explosion count choice, and I'll make sure I copy that, take that back over the script. It will only decide what it wants once. It will decide 3 or 4 times that it wants to explode, and then back in here I want to make sure that my explosion count choice registers correctly. Blood explosion count choice, I'm quickly scanning the code here to make sure that there's no other instances of blood explosion count choice. And I do see that I need to make sure this is updated, because this is very similar to how I had it previously. Argument 0, I need to now say that because I've passed in, did the same thing I did a second ago, because I passed in the ID of the instance, now I have access to what I set in the create event. So I could say argument 0 blood explosion count choice, and it will only try to set the blood explosion count choice once. I think that was a flaw with how I had it previously, because what could potentially happen is it could come in here, and when it should have stopped executing at 3, it could decide, the way I had it a second ago, it could decide, oh, I want to go a 4th time, because it's deciding that every time it hits that in this particular call to the script in the loop of the step event. So so now, since that's only called once, if it hits it the 3rd time and it has selected 3, it will not run this again. Again, I'm trying to be efficient with the code and make sure that it doesn't run more than it should. So the blood explosions I'm controlling right here, I'm saying if the blood explosions is less than or equal to the blood explosion count choice and the object itself is not outside the room, then run this block of code. Otherwise, if it's greater than that, then it will not run this block of code. And again, like I said, I set the blood explosions in the create event. I set it to 0, so this increments each time it hits this block of code. I'm running this every 3 steps. This code right here, argument 0.step modulus 3, is equal to 0. What that does is takes the remainder of whatever, if you're familiar with programming, you're familiar with modulus, it basically takes the remainder of whatever number is set by step and divides it by 3. If the remainder is 0, then it runs this block of codes. That is to say that every 3rd step, the step number that is incremented in the step event will be divisible by 0 and will have no remainder left, so that I can hit this block of code now. Let me show you quickly the step and how it gets incremented in the object itself. So object enemy 1, I'm in the step event, and you can see here that I am incrementing step plus equals 1, and I say if step is greater than or equal to the incrementer, which I set in the create event, then reset it, just set it to 0. I think the incrementer is set to the same as my room speed. Let me see. Incrementer, looking. Here it is. Room speed times image speed divided by speed. This number is a little bit arbitrary. I don't necessarily care what it is. There's only a couple of items here that are controlled by this. If we wanted to get this exactly right, I think the main reason why this is helpful is, as I'm thinking through it, is probably to help the speed engine a little bit. But my room speed is at 60 frames per second. My image speed is set to 0.8, so it's going to say 60 times 0.18. I said 0.8, but I meant 0.18 because base image speed is here, and base image speed sets image speed, and then I say times image speed, and then I divide by speed. So however fast this thing is set to, which I set right here, the original speed is a random choice between 2 and 4. It could be 2, 3, or 4. And I set the original step speed, and then I'm setting the variables like this in a couple different ways because, again, these variables help the speed engine a little bit later on. But just wanted to show you that the step initially, the step variable is set to 0. It increments up to the maximum of the incrementer and then resets to 0. again, it's a little bit arbitrary because it doesn't really matter. The main thing I'm concerned about with it here is that every third step it gets set to 0, and then this block of code can run, which in this particular case is the explosion itself. And let me just see here. It's the explosion itself, and then once I get to this next chunk, I can see that this is the particular case where I'm making the explosions occur. So I just got a text I need to respond to real quick. Let me do that really quick. It's actually Chris, one of the other indie devs, and he might hop on stream here in a second. I just got to make sure I communicate to him real quick. Let me know when you think you're ready to get on stream. So probably what I'm going to do is Skype in with him real quick. The main reason I haven't gotten to show him the shrapnel work that I've done up to this point, and I want him to be able to see it and give me some quick feedback fairly quickly. But this may also give us a chance to talk to Chris and hear his perspective. He's got a really good eye for this, so he knows what looks and feels authentic, so it's good to hear what his thoughts are on this. I feel like right now, based on what I see, it looks a little bit not authentic, and so I'm going to do some changes to the speed and such, the way the physics work with it a little bit, so that I can just make it look a little bit more like it's real physics and real shrapnel are occurring the way you would feel like they should happen, and not just kind of at the same speed as they're going on and off the screen. So, okay, so this is the particular part that I affected last night. I wanted to make sure that I'm in this block of code and I'm making an explosion occur if there are less than 5 explosions. Then run this block of code. So if there are, I should say, less than or equal to 5 explosions, then run this block of code. And inside of here, I'm going to do a couple things. If this is the very first explosion, which is what this says right here, I'm going to make the screen shake, and I'm doing that through a script, passing in some variables. And if Skycurser has more than 0 lives left, play a specific sound. So I do this to make sure that I found a couple of sound glitches specifically with enemy 1 when Skycurser dies completely and these guys are left on screen. If they happen to get destroyed while Skycurser has lost all of his lives, a sound glitch occurs. So this is just a sanity check to make sure that doesn't occur. If Skycurser is all the way dead, we don't want to play these sounds. So if the enemy counter is equal to 2, play this sound. If the enemy counter is equal to 1, play this sound. Otherwise, play this sound. Notice these two are the same. I do see that I could just save some code right here, but again, my current task is not to clean up the code. I'll do that a little bit later, as I have a task set up for it in Trello. Right now, though, I do have aircraft explosion, and this is where the specific explosions occur. This is where the sound of the explosion occurs, but we haven't created any objects of an explosion on screen yet until we get to this point. Again, what I'm doing here, I'm looking for to see if the step is modulus 3 is equal to 0. So again, whatever the remainder of the current step number is divided by 3, is it equal to 0? If it is equal to 0, then hit this block of code. Again, just let me explain that real quick. I know this is fairly basic if you're already familiar with programming, but to anybody who's new and trying to understand it or get into it, if the number is 0, if the current step is 0, then this block of code will run. If the current step is 1, 1 divided by 3 has a remainder. So this block of code will not run. If the number is 2, 2 divided by 3 has a remainder. This block of code will not run. 3 divided by 3 has no remainder. The there is a it divides evenly, and there is no remainder left of any additional numbers that you can no longer do anything with. So it will hit this on 0 and 3, and the next time it will hit it after that is when the step is 6. After that, the next time it will hit it is when the step is 9. So each number that is divisible by 3 leaves a remainder of 0, so this block of code will execute. So then I choose, in here I choose a random X and a random Y. Just make sure I'm staying up with anybody who's in stream. Looks like we're good at the moment. I have a random X and a random Y. So the range that I've selected is when you say random range to GameMaker, you're basically saying any number between these next two numbers that I'm going to put that I'm going to pass as parameters. So the reason why I've chosen -41 and +41, -25 and +25 lies in the size of the sprite itself. I know for sure there's a better way to do this. I will come back and clean that up a little bit later, but not going to do that right now since my task is shrapnel. The reason why I've chosen 41 and what was the other one there, 25, is because of the size of the sprite. So the sprite is almost, is definitely 75 pixels wide, which makes it about 37 being the middle of it. So this whole thing is 75 pixels wide. This point from the left of the pixel all the way to where the point of origin is about 37, and then anything past that is, I think, 38. So 37 and 38, 75. But basically, if I choose 41 negative, so this point right here is actually 0. Anything past here starts counting up. Anything below, behind this point, it goes below 0. So starting at 0 here, we go backwards. We hit -37 about right here. If we give it -41, that's a couple more pixels out. It makes sure that everything is covered whenever there's an explosion. Same with here. This goes a couple more pixels out on +41. If we go +25 and -25, same thing. We're just a little bit past the edge of the sprite, a little bit above the edge of the sprite. This allows us to make the explosion occur. Basically, since I'm choosing a random X and a random Y, any point between -41, +41 on the X-axis, +25, -25 on the Y-axis, then I'm covering all my bases. I can have a pretty decent random looking explosion whenever the explosion actually occurs. So back to this block of code. Once I have my random X and random Y, I can then say I know where I'm going to create this particular one explosion, and so this one explosion will go to the instance of the object enemy 1's X position and plus whatever random position. So if the X position is, let's say, 30 and the random X selected is -10, then the position that it will hit on screen is position 20, because I'm subtracting 10 from position 30. Additionally, because that's where the position 30 is where I arbitrarily chose that argument 0.x would be. Similarly with argument 0.y, wherever the y position is from top to bottom of the object to enemy, plus the random y position. So random y is located right here, -25, +25, and similar to how x works is how y works, and then I'm dropping in the particular object that I've created. That object is down here. Again, it's in the impact section. If I'm looking at the sprite itself that's attached to this, this is what's going to occur. So I'm just kind of clicking through the sub images of the sprite, and so that particular explosion, once I create it, will occur in this particular location, this X and this Y, whatever this gets generated to. Additionally, I want to make sure that the image speed slows down a little bit, because again, most of these images were kind of framed out at 30 frames per second. If I slow it down, it still makes it look really natural, but also makes it look a little bit more dramatic. If it finishes at 30 frames per second, it happens really quickly. I don't want the animation to happen in half a second. I want what we have to last a little bit, just a little bit longer than that. Right now I've done image speed divided by 2 because I feel like that's a good, based on the way it looks whenever the explosion occurs, I feel like that's a good amount of time for that explosion to be on screen. Additionally, the depth that I set on the explosion is depth -1. So the depth of the object enemy 1 -1, that's where I want the explosion depth to be. Now, if you're familiar with GameMaker, you know that as you subtract depth, you get closer to the screen. So if you were able to look at this from top to bottom, the top would be what's closer to the player on screen. So it looks like it's in front of another object. If the depth is higher, let's say higher than whatever the current number is, then that goes behind another object. So let's say my object enemy 1's depth, which I set in the create event of that object, is set to 30, and I say 30 -1, then I'm going to be one step closer to what looks like the top of the screen. So it's going to, the explosion is going to sit on top of the object enemy 1 instead of the other way around. If I make the explosion occur behind, then the look of it just looks a little bit weird. If you want to maintain that 3D effect a little bit, it looks good to have that explosion occur on top of the object itself. So that's what's occurring there, and then I think this right here I identified on stream last night as a little bit redundant. There's no reason for me to set the X and the Y, especially since I set the X and the Y exactly to this right here. And I think I want to modify this a little bit later. I'm not going to do that right now. As I'm going through and cleaning up code, I think I'll come in and control the X and the Y a little bit later. But additionally, last night I added these shrapnel pieces. So I'm basically going to create 6 shrapnel pieces for every explosion. So every time this block of code hits, I'm going to make sure 6 shrapnel pieces are occurred. I have a for loop here, starts at 0, goes through less than 6, and it increments each time it hits the end of the loop. So inside the loop, I'm going to create a random piece of shrapnel. What that means is I'm going to let GameMaker choose randomly any one of the next items in the list. So this is my list of items. I've included the 6 objects that I've created, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've created those 6 objects here, and so now this variable holds whatever object name that I want to create then with the instance create method. Okay, so instance create, then I say argument 0.x. Again, that's the exact point of the object enemy 1's x position plus whatever random x was selected up here. Similar with argument 0y, this is object enemy 1's y position plus the random y selected up here. And then the random shrapnel is whatever has just been chosen from this list of 6. So this means as it's running through this loop, it could choose 6 of the same shrapnel piece. It could choose 2 shrapnel 3, 1 shrapnel 5, and 3 shrapnel 1. So it could do something like that, but that's completely fine because it's supposed to look a little bit random, and I'm okay with it choosing any one of these. The thing I don't want is to show all 6 of them for every explosion, because I think that could just detract from it more than add to it, because you would see the exact same thing with each explosion. I want there to be a little bit of randomization occurring with the explosion. And then with the shrapnel depth, I'm doing this right here. So I'm doing -1, +1. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm subtracting that shrap depth on the next line, which I'm taking the explosion's depth, which again is right in front of the object enemy 1, or we also do the same thing to the object tank 1. The tank again is that big carrier that comes across with the 3 eyeballs. Tank is an arbitrary term for a shmup. Anyways, it's kind of like a bigger object that takes a lot more impact and is kind of one of those things that you want to get really excited about if you've destroyed. So that's specifically what a tank is, and we use it, in the shmup sense of the word for that particular object, where the tank is actually the flying carrier that comes across the screen. But again, this explosion depth occurs so that it's right above the object enemy 1 or the object tank 1 in the tank's code. You'll see that in a little bit because I'm going to make changes here and there. And then so I take the explosion depth and I subtract whatever was set right here. So if I subtract 1, then that particular piece of shrapnel will be on top of the explosion. And because I keep talking about depth, let's just go look at depth based on the way GameMaker explains it. So the way they explain it is this is really simple. They give you 3 objects. One has a depth of 1,000, another has a depth of 0, and another has a depth of negative 1,000. This depth, since it's higher, maybe it seems a little bit more counterintuitive, but if you think about depth in terms of how it works in terms of, I think of it in terms of like sea level. 0 is sea level. If you have a great amount of depth, you're going below sea level. If you have a negative amount of depth, you're going above sea level. So just think of depth as 0 being the sea level. And so back to how this works, if I subtract 1 on the depth, remember negative is above sea level, I'm going to be on top of the explosion. If I subtract negative 1, again, for those of us who sat through math classes in high school and college, when you subtract a negative number, you're basically adding that number. And so I'm going to say depth plus 1, which will put this piece of shrapnel, the shrapnel depth, 1 depth below the explosion. So my goal here was to randomly choose, as these 6 are created, to place the shrapnel in front of and behind the explosion. As it's occurring. So that way the shrapnel is not all coming out on top of the explosion or not coming all out from behind the explosion. Instead we have it could come out in front of or behind the explosion. Again, the hope is to add to the 3D depth or to a little bit of the 3D look of the 2D shmup, so that it feels like there's depth to the game. And then once all the death animations have occurred, specifically the death animation is the blood explosions and the explosions that occur right here, everything else. So I'm checking to make sure the explosions and the blood explosions have occurred correctly. If this instance is still alive, let's say, for instance, the instance might not be alive in the case that the instance flies off screen and it got destroyed through the other script. I want to make sure that if for some reason that happened and I get to this point, even though I'm in my script enemy 1 die, I want to check for the instance one last time right before I try to take the instance. I say with the instance, then run instance destroy. So that's just a quick explanation of how the shrapnel is working. I want to show the shrapnel one more time because I think it's important here. I want everyone to see the shrapnel and why exactly it is that I want to fix what I have right now. Right now the path speed is selected and is not variable once the shrapnel is created, so it goes along the path at the same speed the entire time. I want to have it come out of the explosion quickly, slow down when it's reaching the peak of its height, and then speed up as it's accelerating towards the Earth because of gravity. So I just want it to feel a little bit more authentic. Okay. I'm going to speed up so I can get to those units. I know they're coming right up, so I'm going to slow it down. Here they are. So yeah, this will be really noticeable when I kill this guy on the bottom of the screen. And those shrapnel pieces that go up and then come down, they don't look natural. There's a little bit of, go up as fast as they come down, and it makes it feel not authentic. I'll show it one more time. It's more noticeable on these ones that are lower at the screen. It just doesn't feel right whenever the explosions are going up and then coming down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address that really quickly. And yeah, the game gets a little bit addicting. I just want to keep playing it once I start playing. But okay, so I need to do a little bit of reading on path speed documentation, and that means I'm going to have to open up GameMaker documentation and search for the right things, or the things that I think are going to be correct, and then also start playing around with how I can control the speed as it's going along a path. It's easy for me to control the speed of all other objects that are not going along a specific path, especially kind of, I guess I should explain paths. GameMaker paths are kind of an assistive device for the programmer. They save a lot of programming, especially if you use them correctly. But you don't need a path for everything that comes on screen. Sometimes the object that comes on screen will either fly diagonal across the screen, or it'll fly straight from right to left, or it'll go from top to bottom. So there's not always a need to give an object a specific path. But when you're manipulating objects with paths, the controlling specific things about that object along the path requires a little bit more work and a little bit more coding. So part of the stream, what you'll see is, because I'm not like an expert with GameMaker, I'll have to go look up some documentation, and I think I have to do that right now, and just do a little bit of reading on exactly what I needed to do to control the speed and make it variable while it's moving along its path. So it looks like my paths are from here to here, my path methods, and I want to look at, I'm just going to look through here for a minute. Add point, append, assign, change point, clear points, delete point, duplicate, end, path end action. So I can change the end action. Again, I showed earlier, if you're starting along, if you're running path start, you can determine what an object does when it hits the end of the path with its end action. And so I guess I can control end action with an object once it's already started along the path, even though I set the end action when I instantiated that object along that path. So path exists. I can check to see if the path exists. I can flip the path. I can get a closed path, get a kind, get a length, get a name, get a number, get a speed. That's interesting. A point speed. Get point X, point Y. Ooh. Get precision. I'm going to look at point X. Returns the X coordinate of a given path's given defining point. Ooh, that's really good. The index of the path to check, the point identity to check. Oh. I don't necessarily need that value. The x-coordinate of a given path's given defining point. The point identity. Oh, I guess this could be helpful because if a path has been generated in a particular place on screen and I want to know where the top of the path is, let's say I want to know where the top of the path is, and I only have 3 points along that path, I know that my second point, or my point identity, let me see if it's 0 based or 1 based. Let's see, path points. Path point control. I gotta know if the index of the point is 0 based or 1 based. I'm guessing it's 0 based. Okay, still looking. Oh, you can set the smoothness of a path. That's news to me. I didn't realize you could do that. I've got a couple paths in there, and I would like them to be a little bit more smooth instead of. Of course, I've already got smooth checked so that the path is smooth, but I guess I can make the curves a little bit better. Info bar, but maybe I can tell this by clicking on a specific path point. Close these scripts because there's a lot of them. I have to scroll a lot. Alright, so this guy right here. Oh, man, that's not helpful. Still don't know if it's zero based or one based. Yeah, I don't want to control like that. Let's see, path add. I gotta keep reading path points here. So each of the paths has a starting point, and that point is denoted by the green square. But the current one that I'm looking at or have selected here is denoted by a red circle, and all the other points are a blue circle. So, so my main question is this point right here considered 1, or is it considered 2? Because if this is 0, then this is 1. If this is 1, then this is 2, and that's what I have to figure out. I have to know if the starting point, is a 0-based index. So give me 1 second. Chris is asking if I'm still on, so I'm gonna respond to him. I'm telling him he should hop on so that he can take a look at the progress. Alright. Alright. I'm telling him to hop on. Let me see if I can hop on Skype for him. And see if I can look him up real quick. Alright, so I think he's probably going to call me here in a second, and I'll get into the game and kind of show him what has been completed so far. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep reading on points. Skype, why are you not playing nice? Let him try to call me one more time. Let me try calling him on Skype one more time. See if Skype. Test. Got it. Skype. Skype trouble. The problem I don't like, the thing I don't like about this, in particular, this new interface with Windows 8.1 Pro, is that the settings are just like not obvious. I mean, there's no way I can control my microphone settings in here, and my microphone settings are set up properly. Let me check one more time my microphone settings. That's right. I mean, I don't know where I can control my microphone. Let me try that one more time. So dumb. So annoying. Alright, also look. Windows 8.1, Skype, settings. Win plus C. Options. What the heck? It's not correct. Skype. Win plus C. Where are the settings? There are no settings. Oh my gosh, that's so dumb. Horrible. Try this one more time. No problem with my microphone. So dumb. All right. All right. Chris, if you're watching, I see that you say you're watching. You can hop on Google Plus and try connecting with me that way, because I know I could do a hangout that way. And let me start one and invite you real quick. See if I can do that. Alright, Chris, I just sent you an invitation. See if you can connect with me that way. Check your email. Yeah, I can see your chats, Chris. You may have an email from me. We could connect on Google Plus, maybe talk through it that way. But if you want me to just start, I'll go ahead and start. Not a big deal. If you want to connect on Google Plus, just let me know. All right. So now that we've just going to work past that, I'll show you the game. Show you the updates that I made. Game Maker. I was just kind of talking through, Chris. I was just kind of talking through some of the ways the paths work and how the sprites and the objects and the paths all work together, and how the points that I've added specific scripts and how they work in particular. So let me just run the game so we can see it. So the things that I was saying in particular, Chris, that I wasn't exactly sure that I liked at the moment, sent it to your Google Plus. So try logging into Google Plus. There may be an invitation there. I can also send it to consulting.cruise. Yes. I can't hear you. Is your microphone muted? Let me see if I can control the Game Maker volume. Can I hear you? Hold on a sec, Chris. I can't hear you still. Not exactly sure why. I think I have my... It looks like your microphone is not muted. Say something, Chris. No, I can't hear you still. So I can hear everything. Oh, check some of your settings, Chris. Like, I know you're not muted in the Hangout, but check some of your preferences in Mac and see if your microphone's muted there. Still having a hard time. Can't hear you. what the problem is. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't know, man. I should be able to hear you based on what I see. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. So, all right, that's not a big deal. So what I'll do is I'll walk you through what I've got so far. And in case you're joining us right now, I've got Chris Cruz with me. Chris Cruz is our art director, and he's in chat right now, chatting as Skycurser Dev at the moment. I might be chatting too. That will also probably look like Skycurser Dev. But I'll probably just talk generally through what I'm working on. And so Chris is taking a look. He recently handed off some sprites to me, and I created some shrapnel off the sprites that he gave me. He does all the artwork pixel for pixel. I already mentioned this a little bit earlier, but generally when I got some work done on something, I then just kind of get it to a decent point and then kind of let Chris take a look at it, give me some feedback. Before I hop on it, Chris, I'll just mention really quick that it looks like you hopped off of Google+. That's totally fine. Before I get into it real quick, I'll just quickly mention that the things that I think are not looking correct on it right now are the path that these pieces of shrapnel travel and the speed at which they travel along the path. So the speed is consistent. The speed doesn't slow up or slow down or speed up. And I'm trying to work through this and make sure that the path, that the physics, the physics that we're kind of generating in game look authentic. And so where I'm at with it right now is I'm trying to do a little bit of research and reading in the game maker documentation so I can speed up and slow down the shrapnel as it moves along a specific path. So I'll just play the game, back to playing and letting you see. Okay, so I'm going to turn the music down just a little bit on my machine. It's probably really loud for you guys. Okay, so here's the shrapnel. I've added the shrapnel to two units. The shrapnel is added to the EBPs and the carriers. So it looks really good right now if it's flying along a path that just kind of goes left to right or right to left. But where it looks really kind of funny right now are the tight paths, the paths that it's all blowing up in one particular place. And so whenever the explosion occurs, it goes up in the air and then comes down at the same speed, and it just doesn't look right. So that's where I'm at with it, Chris. I'm open to whatever your thoughts are here on it. Yeah, no problem that you jumped off. Oh, it's not loud. That's good. What's kind of slow is the explosion itself is slow. You figured it would just explode a lot quicker and all the shrapnel would go in a lot of different places quicker. Or the shrapnel animation is slow. But the movement of the path. Okay, yeah, I think I like that. I think I had the animation a little bit faster, and I actually slowed down the animation, so I'm glad that we're on the same page there. And I actually sped up the shrapnel so that it would fly across the screen quicker. And I'll do the same thing right now. I'll speed it up even more. So I'm setting the speed of the shrapnel in the base object as. So I'll talk through this. I already talked through it a little bit earlier. I've got speeds 3, 4, and 5. I had 1 through 5. I took 1 and 2 out because it was just some of the pieces of shrapnel were just traveling too slow across the screen. So I'll change this to, let's just change this to 6, 7, and 8 and see how that affects it. Things should happen a lot quicker. But I still think I'm going to need to have some variable speed along the pathing in different places just to make, especially those tight ones, look correct so that they're not going the same speed up and down. Alright, we'll wait for the next one. Here we go. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, Chris. Animation slow, but movement quick. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So that's where I'm at with it. Controlling speed, Chris, one of the things I was mentioning is controlling speed along a path is a little bit more difficult than just controlling the speed of an object that's not following a path. So I'm just reading some documentation right now and trying to figure out what to do with that. Any additional thoughts on that? So the answer to your question is yes, the shrapnel all does actually follow a path. And that's why it's harder to control. Yeah, I think that's just how it is whenever you enter a message. It takes a minute for me to see it. I think that's just how normally internet chats are. It's not like Skype where you chat something and it goes almost immediately. I'm a little sad we can't get our technology playing nicely together. I'm tempted to try one more thing on Skype. Can we try one more thing on Skype? And now I wait 30 seconds for the answer to come across. Alright, here we go. Trying Skype. Alright, so I'm going to try. Let's try this first. Okay, didn't work. Hold on a sec. Let me try something real quick. While I'm waiting. Try this guy. Answer. Nothing. Okay. Dismiss. Hold on a sec. Still trying. Options. Try using default on everything. Try this one more time. I don't hear anything ringing like I was initially. I think that's a problem. I need to get my speakers back. Or maybe when I'm calling somebody it doesn't. Freaking Windows 8.1 Pro. Hold on, I've got Skype for Desktop open. Alright, I'm going to try it this way. Chris, let's try this one. You picking up? That didn't work. Try one more time. Close this guy. Sec. Skype. Troubleshoot. Test. Not sure what could be causing this to get blocked. Of course, our video was working fine. I couldn't hear your audio. Hey, love, how's it going? Yeah, that's good. Alright, let me try this one more time. Good, babe. Glad to hear it. Oh, we got it. I'm not sure what happened. Great. Perfect. Yeah. Well, I can always reduce it so that it doesn't happen on every explosion with the carrier. I know, it almost looked like that the second I got done programming it, and I only added like 3 to 4 lines of code. Yeah. No, the answer is that they are all moving on a path, and pathing speed is hard to control. I don't have the knowledge for it yet, so I'm trying to do a lot of reading in the documentation to control the pathing speed. I know it's possible because I have read a little bit of it before, but I haven't ever done it yet. So you can set the pathing speed the second that it starts along a path, but controlling it is not as easy as me saying, grab that piece of shrapnel and set its speed now to this over this amount of time. Instead, you have to know where it's at along the path and then use a specific path speed command, if that makes sense. Yeah, it feels like, honestly, I don't know. I should be able to just take a look at where it is along the path with some specific commands, and then just then change its speed